The RecoverCon podcast is a podcast dedicated to ideas and concepts that are moving and growing in recovery. My name is Gerald Lott. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also executive director and founder of Sauk Valley Voices of Recovery. We're a recovery community organization serving Northern Illinois. I started this podcast because I was going around the country meeting different people and finding out that there's a ton of really cool things happening in the recovery space, and I wanted to try and highlight them. There's a saying that you have to welcome discomfort sometimes. You have to go looking for pain. And we as alcoholics and addicts don't really like pain. But we eventually learn that, if you're not willing to go through these things, if you're not willing to accept a little discomfort, you never will grow. There's a saying, no pain, no gain, and it's exactly correct. It takes us going through some things to learn how to live in this world. And so I meet these different people and we come together to just kind of have some conversations about what recovery looks like in their life. Today, my guest is Kriya Lendzion. She is a counselor who works with youth and all over the country, speaking and counseling and running workshops all over the country. So welcome to the show, Kriya.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor, Gerald.
Absolutely. So give us a little background. Who is Kriya?
Yeah, so I'm a person in recovery as well, and my story was a teen story. I kind of, hit it hard young and turned things around or started the process at 19. And now I use that journey to inspire what I do for a living, which is, a lot of things for the prevention and early intervention into substance use and addictive behaviors of all kinds with young people.
And so what does that work look like? Where does that take you?
So I started just teaching like drug education in schools, and I was working as a school counselor, and I have worked as a school counselor for 23 years. I am retired now, but my personal passion and kind of expertise, in the areas of addictions and substance use led me to just very naturally diving in and teaching some kind of reality-based drug education in the schools that I was working in. And that kind of people caught word of that and started asking me to do that all around my community. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And then I was, around Western North Carolina. And then, fast forward. And I also started training educators on, so what can we do in a school environment that actually helps to prevent kids from going there or catch them early? Because I know that people miss the signs when I was a kid in school. And so I'm trying to be, help empower teachers and staff to do what wasn't done for me. And then workshops for parents. And so that has just, next thing I knew, I was being asked to speak all over the country on this topic, which is just awesome.
And that's amazing how, people with a message get asked to go out and to find more and more kids. And generally every program that I work with, youth prevention, youth education is a huge component that is required of most grants, most programming, federal, state, local. Everybody wants to talk to the children. And so I'm going to ask, well, how do you think we should talk to the kids?
Great question. Yeah, because I feel like we did it wrong for a long time. I agree. I don't know. I'm often asked, like, what would have made a difference for me, right? And I have to think about that. And that's what I try to bring. Is like, what would I have needed to hear, right? Mm-hmm. I think for one, we need to speak to them in their values, like not that tar-covered lung or the cirrhosis liver in formaldehyde in a jar. Like, didn't do anything for me. I was like, we don't have, when we're teenagers, we don't have the frontal lobe of our brain close to even developed anyway. So we don't see, they don't see big picture thinking, and they're not really forward. They're very much in like, what's going to give me some dopamine, some acceptance, some comfort in my skin right now. right? That's what
Right.
they're thinking at. So we need to talk more kind of short-term impacts and in areas that matter to them. So if it's about athleticism, and if it's about where they're going to go to college, cool. Then you talk about how substances could affect or interfere with those things. But it might be more about like freedom and independence and self-confidence and acceptance, their skin, their vanity. I mean, if they're modeling to their younger sibling, or just like not being depressed and not having ADHD, like speaking to how substance use could make those things worse. Or get in the way of them having these things that they want for themselves and who they believe in being. But we have to speak to them.
See, I agree with you that like programs that tried to scare us out of doing drugs like DARE and such did nothing for me. And so, we go into our local high schools to speak, and we've taken another tack, right? I go in and I say, you know what? How many of you guys have heard of AIDS? And they're all, oh yeah, we've all heard of AIDS. I said, well, back when I was your age, they were telling us if you have protected sex, AIDS would go away. So now there's no more AIDS, right? And they're like, no, AIDS is still around. I'm like, exactly, right? Because everybody thought, well, it won't happen to me. As a teen, I'm sure you'll get hooked on drugs. It won't happen to me.
Right.
But it does.
Yeah.
And so I don't even really, the odds of me going into a high school classroom and some kid standing up and be like, I've been smoking crack all day is so low. So we just go in and we talk about, hey, how many of you guys have a mom, a dad, a friend, a neighbor, a cousin, a brother, a sister who's struggling with drugs or alcohol? And to a person, almost everyone will raise their hand.
Yep.
And then we say, well, let's talk about what recovery will look like and how you can support recovery with them. You see what I'm saying? And we take it off of that person and we say, what? Because our goal is not to fix them. Our goal is to let them know that recovery exists. A lot of kids don't even know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think speaking to, I think that part of that scare tactic thing that you're talking about is there's been the, the whole like faces of meth and, like you show, this end stage addiction. This is what happens, when like the roughness of where this can go. And again, some kids may be impacted by that, but they think that, like you just said, that they're just doing this for now. They're just doing this for fun. So even if they had, my father was an alcoholic and addict. I didn't have him in my life because he was an alcoholic and addict, and my mom choosing to leave him and him being in and out of my life, like it was hurtful. And so I knew I didn't want to be like that, but I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be because I was going to control it. I was just doing it for fun, that's what everybody thinks when they pick it up. So the other piece of talking to them is I just call that out and say, okay, let's kind of like empathizing and validating, like, why do kids go there? The ones that choose to go there, why do they go there? We'll write that all out on the board. And it's usually, one of like 5 reasons: for connection and belonging, for a sense of control, over their lives and freedom and independence, for just fun and thrill and excitement, to cope with funky feelings and escape, turn down, run away from stuff, or just to feel like have a sense of identity and like who they are, feel like they got a sense of purpose and worth, right? So those 5 reasons. And so kids go there to meet that. So you can say it makes sense, right? That if it works and brings something that you want or takes away something that you don't want, that you would keep on doing it. But in my 30 years of working with addicts, I have never, and knowing addicts, right? I have never known anybody that wanted to become addicted, that thought they would when they picked it up. So I speak to that part. Like, let's be real. Like some of this stuff like works as a shortcut to give you these things that you want. And it makes sense you'd be attracted to it. And it makes sense that you would keep doing it if it works for you. But here's the risk. Here's the risk. And then laying down kind of what risk factors are. One of them being genetics. Another one being if you have a hole in any of those needs I just mentioned, right? Like connection or esteem or coping skills or fun. If you got a hole in any of those places, then you put a substance in there and it works for you better than anything else, you're gonna attach to it.
Yeah.
because I grew up around over a bar and a restaurant when I was a teenager. So when I had all my tough feels, wanted to impress everybody, I would, not only would we bust out the cheesecake and the chocolate mousse, but the booze and the bar. And so I was in rehab at 19 with a full-blown eating disorder and alcoholism.
No, I completely get it.
Yeah.
Same for me. I mean, I trace my addiction back to that loneliness, to that lack of connection, to not fitting in. I 100%. The issue, I guess, that I run up against is I've been sober a long time. I was sober a long time before that, and I relapsed. And I think the thing that kept my relapse going was that I have been told, if you ever pick up again, it'll kill you right there on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did, it didn't. Right?
Yeah.
And so then that negated everything everybody else had told me. And that's where I'm fearful of kids, like, the old reefer madness,
right.
Concept. You take one hit of a joint and you'll go bananas.
Right.
Well,
that's what Dare did. Like you were saying,
yeah. He takes a hit. It doesn't. Mm-mm. It doesn't make him crazy. And now he says, oh, that guy, everything he said was nonsense. Mm-hmm. And they throw it all out. Yeah. And so we have to come at youth with a little more, as you said, logical, truthful, direction, which is you'll probably do drugs and alcohol for a while and it won't have any negative effects. Mm-hmm. It might even be fun.
Yeah.
Problem is, by the time you realize you got a problem, you're in the problem.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
I don't know. It's very hard when you're dealing with some of the requirements of government programming and such, because they want a immediate result and response from the youth.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to see. I don't think you go speak to a class today and by next Monday everybody in the class is fixed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the most valuable conversation I can have with them, just like you're saying, is keeping it real with them is, all right. So I will break down what problem use is. I think that's the thing that's one of the pieces nobody ever talked to me about either. It was just so what are those lines between somebody's just they're experimenting versus they are, socially using. I don't like that term because I only use socially as an addict, right? Mm-hmm. But responsible use, and then where's problem use or having a use disorder? What does that look like? And where those and kind of that continuum of use, right? And so I think breaking that down, and I do that with young kids because it can apply to other things. Like a lot of kids are getting addictive relationships with screens right now,
mm-hmm.
And these.
Very much so.
So I can talk about so what is the difference between responsible use, versus problem use of anything. And kids can understand that and break that down, young. So then it's okay, so then what are how are you going to stay in the responsible use lane? What's your plans for yourself? How are you going to take care of each other and your friends? What are those signs to be concerned about, right? When somebody's slipping or when you're starting to slip. And what are your strategies for sort of getting yourself on track? So, and knowing, of course, with addiction, it doesn't always work, that oh, I want to make a change. Cool. Right. Which is one of the things we explain. If you can't make limits for yourself, we all sort of have mistakes. We have, sometimes there's that drunken night and we go, oh crap, I, did too much of that or, shouldn't have driven home or whatever. And so it's if you can't reel that in and go, oh, let me make some limits that are way more healthy and responsible, and you can't stick to those limits, that's the ding, ding, ding. That's the red flag that you are slipping into something that is getting control of you instead of you in control of it. And so some of the most valuable thing for them to understand is what problem use even looks like, how to help a friend if you're worried about him and say something, and how to get yourself some early kind of intervention if you're starting to slip.
I guess I completely understand the concept of problem use versus responsible use. And believe me, I am a proponent. I don't see drugs as bad. You know, if somebody can figure out how to use cocaine right, great. You know what I mean? That's not my hill to die on.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that there are medical uses for the chemical compound of heroin that make life doable for it. So I'm not. I always say we're not a temperance society. You know, if you can do it,
Right.
do it.
Yeah.
As you said, my goal is to work with the guy who can't handle it, who's losing his family, who's neglecting his responsibilities, who can't maintain employment, who is tearing his life down. And if I'm really honest, Kriya, I really
Mhm.
don't even care about that. I care about how that guy tearing his life down is creating that ripple that's tearing up other people's lives. Because
Yeah.
if somebody just wants to go sit in a building by themselves and and destroy their life, society really doesn't care.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing we have to let our kids know
Yeah.
is that when the problem starts, a bunch of people are going to come towards you and they're
Mhm.
going to try to pull you out of it because that's what we do.
Mhm.
I don't know if you saw recently there was an earthquake in San Diego and the elephants like all formed an alert circle to protect the young elephants, right? Right? That's what we do. We
Yeah.
turn and we protect.
Yeah.
But the nature of addiction is that then the addiction starts to tear on those people.
Right.
And then shortly after they all come to protect, they all run away.
Yeah.
And when they run away is when the problem is
Yeah.
because that leaves that person in this world by themselves, no support, bridges burned,
Mhm.
and then it gets hairy.
Yeah.
That's where it gets to be a problem. And I don't
Yeah.
think kids know. I
Mm.
often tell kids, I'm 59 years old. In the last year, I've maybe met 8 or 9 people that I could be friends with that weren't associated through work or something like that.
Mhm.
Kids walk into a building every day with 400 other kids that they
Yeah.
can be friends with.
Right.
They don't know what real loneliness feels like. They may think they do. A lot of times they feel the outsider, they feel
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Some do.
But wait till you're 50.
No. Yeah. I know. Right. Right.
Wait till you're 50, right?
Yeah.
And so as you said, when you have that hole in your soul
Mhm.
that can only be filled by something and you start filling it up with substances,
Mhm. Yeah.
you look up shortly after that and you find that the only thing there is the substance.
Yeah, yeah. And part of that education too also includes kind of teaching the science of addiction. I mean, how it really hijacks the brain,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, it doesn't matter how determined you are for it not to be you, is it's not a willpower thing. It literally hijacks the brain. And so, and especially when you're in those malleable years of like middle and high school,
Mm-hmm.
is how the brain is completely different than it is when you're older. And when that is completely, when your functions and structures of the brain are done growing at mid to late 20s, then substances impact you a little bit differently than they do. But talking about that you're way higher risk of not only does it change your brain when you use younger, especially if you use stronger things, you use regularly, it can really affect your brain long term, but that you're way more at risk of developing addiction. I mean, it can leave lasting marks on the functions and structures of the brain. So they need to understand that part and to understand that they're very prone. They're wired for addiction and habit forming like no other time in their lives. Is that addiction really? I think of it as a learning disorder more than anything else. Is that the brain, if it works and it pops off the feel good chemicals they want, or it gets rid of the stuff that they don't want, dopamine pops off. It goes cha-chonk and hardwires a connection in their brain that can last into adulthood that says, do that thing, it works for me. So them, it's not, I don't want to give the impression that I'm just, teaching kids like how to use drugs safely. I'm also saying like, if you have genetic predisposition, if you go there, the longer you wait, the less the less you do, or the weaker of the substances that you do, the better if you're going to go there. But ideally, you wait till your brain is grown. You use weak things rarely if you're going to go there at all. And if you have a genetic predisposition, you really need to keep yourself in check, because you might want to avoid it altogether, because you're kind of asking for it if you put those things together,
Do you, as you work with these different kids, do you find that there are any telltale signs? Is there, do you ever find like the kid that is 100%, sports, and they're, doing 4 or 5 different sports at all times, never ever gets into drugs? Or is it just kind of across the board? Are there any indicators?
Yeah, I mean, I think when a kid shows signs, they're definitely more at risk when they have gaps in those areas that I mentioned, right? Like they have social awkwardness, that they have a hard time making friends, keeping friends. They seem to feel uncomfortable in their skin. They're more likely to kind of fall for the pressures of the ideas that I got to do this to belong. Or if they do, like me, when I put alcohol in my body, I was like, oh, my anxiety's gone. I actually feel normal. Like it soothed me. So a kid that has impulsivity and compulsivity, so they're kind of dopamining, they seem to be like really need to have like extra dopamine charges, which we know some of us are just born with, kind of having a dopamine deficit, and we crave it extra. ADHD, that's part of what ADHD is there's a lot of ADHD addicts. I can go hand in hand. So that can be a sign that a kid is kind of at risk of going there. Any mental health issues, like a kid is way more likely to use if they're struggling with depression or stress or anxiety, or OCD even, and they're way more likely to become addicted if they are struggling with those things. Because if you get high and you feel better for a couple hours, again, why would you not keep on doing it? And they don't always recognize that it's actually doing, like it's backfiring in the background. It's damaging their neurotransmitters in their brain. It's damaging their mood, their ability to balance their mood and manage their mood like long term, and worsening that. But they don't know, because in the moment, it's a shortcut to feeling better.
Well, it's so interesting. We hear all the time that you stop growing emotionally at the time that you start using, and
that's brain science.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't. I don't know your spiritual beliefs, but I
have them.
You ever heard you can't see God through the front windshield, but you can see him in the rearview mirror?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of the same. You can't see the warnings looking forward. Mm-hmm. Right. As a 17-year-old, I can't look out into my future and say, wow, this thing that I'm doing is going to damage me.
Right.
But when I'm 37 and I look back and be like, holy cow.
Yeah.
If I had not done X, then this might have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So the best thing we can do, Gerald, the best thing we can do is to help kids have those alternatives, like that are convenient to them, that they can access and that work for them. Mm-hmm. So that kind of those holes are filled. So even if they're like, all right, well, I'll just try it. I'll just say yes when it's going around or whatever. And they go, okay, so that's a thing. It could be like an option in my little toolbox or whatever. It could be an option among options to have fun or, whatever. But I don't need it because the hole isn't there, right? And I've got 100 other ways to feel good about myself that aren't kind of risking my brain growth and aren't, risking damage to me. And so that they hopefully won't attach to it if they have satisfying ways of doing the same thing.
And so I guess that's where our attack when we go to the schools takes a different turn, because that's where we present ourselves as adults. I'm nobody's gonna mistake me as a teen, and so Instead of me going in and trying to be the cool guy, trying to tell them, I was there, I remember what you're going. Instead, what I say is, hey, because we live in a small town, most of the people in this area, if they don't know each other, we know of each other, or, a small rural community. So a lot of times I'll go in and I'll say, a lot of you all know my daughter. You all went to school with her, you played with her, blah, blah, right? When you all think of an addict, when you all think of the problem person, when you all think of the person that nobody wants to come to Thanksgiving dinner, that's me 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm the guy that I came down the street and everybody ran. Oh my God, we don't want to be around this guy.
Yeah.
And here I am 17 years later, and I'm raising my daughter well. She's doing great. My community looks up to me. I'm getting awards, and people are donating to us, and people, are working for me, and I help them have so the guy that's at home that you're giving up on, saying dad is just a crummy person, I don't want anything to do with him. Don't give up, because 5 years from now, you could be proud of him.
Yeah.
And that's how we walk into what is recovery and what does recovery look like.
I love that. Because I did a presentation for the American School Counselors, like all counselors all over the country last year, the national conference on supporting kids of addiction. The children, like what that looked like for schools. What can you do in a school to support these kids that there are a growing number of, in school, because they are at extra risk of developing.
And to be honest with you, kids are so evil and cruel. I don't want to say they're evil. They're not evil, but they are mean, right? And the last thing you want is to be the kid whose dad is known around town as being drunk.
Right.
Right.
But I find though underneath that, like they will do mean stuff to each other when they think it's gonna like get them, some laughs, or they all feel better about themselves. But I find that like you dig down and underneath that, most of them really do have a good amount of compassion under there.
I think you're right.
They don't want to hurt people. They don't believe in hurting people. So,
I think you're right, but I don't think that they. I think you're right, but I don't think they know the potential damage that they can do. And so I'll tell you.
They don't connect. They don't make that connection.
59 years old. At the end of my block when I was a kid, there was this long hedge, and there was a sidewalk on the other side of the hedge. And I must have been 8 or 9. And I remember a friend of mine walking on the other side of the hedge said something mean about me, and he didn't know that I could hear him because I was on the other side of the hedge. And here I am 51 years later, and I can still remember that. I can feel it inside. That hurt. Yeah. It crushed me.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me for 50 years. We went on to become friends again, and we're doing great and all that, but it's still there. And that's what I mean by kids don't know the potential. You don't know when you say your dad's a drunk.
Right.
If you're hitting them in the gut that day.
Well, and part of that is that whole frontal lobe thing, that prefrontal cortex behind because when they are 14, 30% of the front part of their brain is still left to grow. It hasn't grown yet. So, and what that is big picture thinking, and empathy is in there. So that's where the ability to say, oh, if I do this thing, what could happen? Or how could my actions affect other people? So one of a valuable thing that we can do when we're talking about substances and talking about their risks for them is to actually, we got to play it out. We got to kind of stretch their brains to actually go, okay, so then what could happen? Like how could this affect you? Again, in these ways that matter to you, like what if you were to keep using, or what if this were, like we have to, they benefit from us helping them play out situations in terms of how could this affect you and how could this affect other people. But they really have to almost like force it. We have to help them do that stretching. And we know that the more kids think things out, the more they plan for what do you do if you're at the party, or what if you do if your ride is drunk, or what if you like the more that they actually practice out scenarios in their head and play them out, the more impactful they are to them, and the more likely they are to sort of follow their plans. So that's something that we as adults, in whatever role we play with them, can help them do to actually help them make more conscientious and wiser decisions for themselves.
Well, look, we only have a few more minutes, so I want to say I'm so excited to talk to you about this. I think a lot of people are going to learn quite a bit from you on how to approach this with youth, and
awesome.
And I hope people reach out. I'm putting your website up here so that people can go and check it out and ask you to intervene for them.
Yeah, and I love to educate parents. I love to educate educators. I love to educate other clinicians, at how to work with teens and talk to them about these things in ways that actually impact them. So I would love people to reach out.
Awesome. So everybody at home, as you can see, week after week, episode after episode, we bring people that are out there trying to fight the good fight to let everybody know that you don't have to do these things alone. Myself, my team at Sauk Valley Voices of Recovery, my producer, Ashley Odell, all of us believe that the world will respond if you ask for help. And I have to believe, Kriya, if you were at a school and you were approached afterwards by a youth who said, "Hey, I'm having this problem," or such.
It happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
It happens all the time. Yep.
That's how we get moving, guys. That's how we find the support that we need. So if you're struggling, don't struggle alone. Call your local recovery community organization. Call your local school counselor. Call your police department. Just call a neighbor. Go out in front of your house and just start yelling. Somebody will come. Do something to let somebody know that you're struggling, because you don't have to struggle alone. Kriya, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
My pleasure. Thanks for including me.
Of course. So everybody at home, we'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourselves until the next time. Bye-bye.